stuff while you're in there, right? So I got the best one that I could find, just one of those big spoons, and I took it up to our hill there on the bluff, and I started using it to dig our hole. Well, I think we lost that one, and I needed another one. And so I got another spoon from my mom's kitchen, and then Mom starts realizing her spoons are gone. And she starts looking around thinking, where are my spoons? And she realizes several of them have been removed from the kitchen. She asks Cliff and I where the spoons are, and we say, oh yeah, we've been using those for digging. You know, you're not supposed to use kitchen spoons for digging dirt in your yard on the bluff to dig a big hole. Well, I didn't know that as a kid. I thought, hey, a spoon's a spoon, and it looks like almost like a shovel anyway, and so I'll just use one of my mom's good spoons. You don't use good spoons for digging. That's not what they're designed to do. That's not the purpose of a kitchen spoon. In fact, the fine china kitchen spoons are set apart for one purpose. You know what a spoon in the kitchen is set apart for? It's set apart for eating food in the kitchen. That's the purpose. And when you take a spoon and you use it for something that it wasn't designed to be used for, and you use it for something that it wasn't set apart to be used for, then you are profaning the spoon. You are taking something that is set apart for a special service or something important, and you're putting it in the dirt. You're profaning it. You're making it dirty. There again. The shoes that I've got on my feet right now, they are Eccos. E-C-C-O. Now, when I went to buy them, it was a great sale. They're normally $160, and it was half price, and I got them for $80. And I thought, wow, this is great. But then when I went to find my size, they said, what size do you wear? And I said, oh, about 11 and a half. They said, well, we don't have these in 11 and a half. It's a 42, a 44, or a 48. And I said, I don't know, what are you talking about? They said, it's European measurements, and you'll just have to see which of those work. So I think I'm wearing a 42 Ecco slip-on leather upper sole shoe. This is it right here. In fact, I'll show it to you right here. Now, it's old now. It's about 6 years old, but it's one of the best shoes that I've ever put on. But yesterday, my son has a chicken coop. He's got a little chicken coop that holds about 6 chickens. And so the chicken coop has been in one place in our backyard for quite some time, and it's starting to pile up with a bunch of chicken stuff underneath the coop, and we needed to clean it up. Now, I'm about to start cleaning the chicken coop, and I think to myself, Kyle, these are the shoes that you wear all the time on a regular basis. If you clean the chicken coop with these shoes on, then there's a good chance they're never going to be the same. There's a good chance that you could get a bunch of chicken poop on your shoes and you won't be able to wear them inside your house anymore, etc. But I thought, you know what, I'll just be careful, and I probably won't get any chicken poop on my shoes, so no problem. All right, so I thought I did. Thought that's what went on. Thought I had been very careful and taken care of my shoes. I get in my truck today to drive up here, and I smell something. I think, what is that? And then I think to myself, yeah, it's chicken poop. I mean, this is obviously very clearly chicken poop. And so I look on the bottom of my shoes, covered in chicken poop. So I have to pull over to a gas station, and I take a knife and I try to scrape the chicken poop off of my shoes, and I realize, you know what I've done to my shoes? I've profaned them. These shoes were not designed to be used to clean chicken coops. They were designed, well, I used them, I set them apart, I have sanctified them to be used for daily wear and mid to casual speaking engagements. That's what these shoes are for. But I cleaned a chicken coop out wearing them, and now these shoes might never be the same. I've profaned them. Do you know the difference between something that is sanctified, set apart, and something that is profaned? Something that is sanctified, it's not even a religious word necessarily. Now, it's taken on the idea of religious word, but sanctified means to set apart for a specific purpose. A kitchen spoon is set apart to be used only in the kitchen. One more thing that I did, and this will illustrate the point just a little bit further. My son has those chickens, and yesterday my daughter was doing a video project for her language class. And the video project was they had to do some stuff that related to a book called Hatchet. And they needed a bird in a scene in Hatchet. The guy's trying to shoot these kind of what he calls fool birds, F-O-O-L, because they're fooling him because they're real camouflaged. And so my daughter asked if she could have a chicken to use. And I thought, well, my chicken might fly away if I get it out and take it to this field where she's going to be doing this filming. So I think I'll just trim its pinions, its flying wing feathers. I think I'll just trim them. Now, I haven't told my wife this, but I didn't have a pair of chicken trimming scissors. And so they're in the kitchen. There's the knives, and then right there's a little thing for the kitchen shears is what they're called. And I thought, you know, that won't hurt anything to grab some chicken shears. No, kitchen shears. And so got my chicken, trimmed his little wing feathers so he couldn't fly off with my wife's kitchen shears. Now, like I said, I washed them good, but I'm using them for something they're not designed to be used for and not set aside for. That's what happens when there's something special and holy and separate, and when we take it and use it for something plain, something dirty, something ordinary, something profane. And I want y'all to turn your Bibles to Ezekiel chapter 22. Now, Ezekiel chapter 22 is our assigned text, and we're going to look at how the Israelites were taking holy things, things that were separate, things that were set apart, and they were using them in a daily, ordinary, dirty, normal way. They were profaning these things. You look in verse 26, talking about the priest, and God says, her priest, Ezekiel 22, 26, have violated my law and profaned my holy things. They haven't distinguished between the holy and the unholy, nor have they made known the difference between the unclean and the clean, and they have hidden their eyes from my Sabbath, so that I am profaned among them. Basically, God says they're taking my holy things and they're using them for ordinary, dirty things. Now, let's see how in our day and time we might profane God and profane holy things. In the Old Testament, you might know that there was a series of scribes called the Masoretes. The Masoretic scribes were so very in tune to holy things that as they were writing down the text of the Old Testament, every single time they wrote the name God, every time, they would stop, throw the quill away that they had just used to write God's name, go and wash their hands, come back and pick up a brand new quill and start writing with that new quill right after they have said God, have written the word God. Now here's the interesting thing. Some verses you'll have the word God in a single verse 6 or 8 or 10 times. When they would write that word, they would then get rid of that quill, go wash their hands, come back, and within 3 more words, new quill, wash your hands. Within 3 more words, new quill, wash your hands. Within 3 more words, new quill, wash your hands. When a copy of the Old Testament started getting where the pages were torn, started getting where it looked a little old, they would take that copy of the Old Testament and they would bury it or burn it because they didn't think anything with God's name on it should look old or should get tattered, and they didn't think that something that had the holy name of God should look old. And that's why you got 6,000 copies of the manuscripts of the New Testament and far fewer than that of the Old Testament, because the people would bury Old Testament copy manuscripts if they had anything about them that looked old or ordinary or in their minds profane. And now come to today. The name of God. The people in the Old Testament many times wouldn't even say the name out loud. You'll read in Exodus chapter 20, one of the 10 Commandments was, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. What happens when you take the name of God and you use it in a way that is ordinary and that is meaningless or vain? You've heard this done on a regular basis. In fact, the bulk of our society in the United States of America thinks nothing whatsoever of misusing, mishandling, taking God's name and making it just ordinary. I was listening to a radio the other day, radio station, and they were giving away, it was something trivial. It was like a $10 gift card to somewhere in, like to Chili's or something. That was the price, $10. So a girl calls in, if you're the 9th caller and you call in, you get this $10 gift card. She calls in, hey, you've just won this $10 gift card to Chili's or wherever. I'm going to suggest that she took the Lord's name in vain and said, oh my God, I'm going to say 10 times in the course of 25 seconds over winning a $10 gift card to Chili's. Now, was that so important that she needed to repeat God's name over and over because there was something holy that she was trying to bring to the discussion? Now, you and I both know what was going on there. Our society has taken the name of God that's supposed to be separate, that's supposed to be holy, that's supposed to be sanctified, and has pulled that name out of its holy place and thrown it down to even less than ordinary everyday language. They've thrown it down into a curse word in many cases, and vain usage, OMG, used over and over, literally millions and millions of times every single day. And not a single one of those is where a person is thinking about God in a holy, reverent, respectful way. Now, lots of times, the older generation hears you as younger people, and they'll hear the younger people say, oh my God, and they'll think, wow, I cannot believe that this younger generation will use the Lord's name in vain. But then you will sit right next to those older people on any given day, and they will say something like, good Lord, would have never thought of that. Or Lordy, Lordy, sure is interesting. Or Lord, no, I'd never do that. If you have listened to much, even old school country, Alan Jackson, Garth Brooks, etc., one of their favorite fill-in words is Lord. You shall not take the name of the, how's that text go? Lord, your God, in vain. For the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. That exclamation using Lord just the same as, oh my God, good Lord, taking God's name out of its holy place and using it in a profane way. Taking your good Sunday shoes and cleaning chicken coop with them. Taking the kitchen spoon and digging a muddy hole with it. Something that's holy and sanctified and that is being profaned. God was being profaned among the Israelites because there were things that He was separating as holy. His name. His name wasn't like any other name. And yet, many of them were taking His name in vain. Let's look at something else that they were taking in vain. There at the end of that verse, He says, my Sabbaths you are profaning. Now, how in the world would they profane a Sabbath? It's real easy. God said, 6 days you shall work, for in 6 days the Lord made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and all that is in them. And on the 7th day He ceased His creative activity. So you work for 6 days and stop working on the 7th day. You know what they were doing with Saturday? Nothing different. Nothing different than they were doing with Friday. They were selling fish on Saturday just like they were selling fish on Friday. They were cleaning out their chicken coops on, well, actually, the Israelites probably didn't have chicken coops. Those have been unclean birds, but they were cleaning out their goat pens on Saturday just like they were cleaning out their goat pens on Friday. They were planting their crops on Saturday just like they were planting their crops on Friday. They weren't setting Saturday apart as any different than any other day of the week. In fact, multiple times throughout the Old Testament, God says, you have profaned my Sabbaths. You have not set them aside as holy. You have not distinguished any difference between a Sabbath and a non-Sabbath day. You know, it's real simple. Is there a day that God has set apart today to be holy? Not like the Sabbath, not where you don't work, but to be a day where the church that He purchased with the blood of Jesus meets together and partakes of the Lord's Supper and thinks about God and the crucifixion and the resurrection. Is there a day that God has set apart like that today? Now, like I said, it's not as if it's an Old Testament Sabbath. It's not that the Lord's Day now has any type of stipulation of don't work or don't plow your field or don't mow your grass. That's not what the Lord's Day now is, but it is supposed to be a day that we set aside to remember Jesus Christ, His crucifixion, and His resurrection. Take the Lord's Supper. Come together. Worship God. Are people today profaning the Lord's Day? Do they treat it like any other day? They get up on a Sunday, they have no idea about worship, they have no thought for what they're going to do in relation to thinking about God that day. They're going to go fishing. They're going to mow their grass. They're going to go over to their friend's house. They're going to go shoot basketball. They're going to do any number of things, but in the course of that day, they're not going to set aside any time to think about Jesus and His sacrifice on that cross. What are you doing when you take the Lord's Day? The New Testament describes it in the book of Revelation as the Lord's Day. What are you doing when you take that and you don't choose to recognize it as different? You don't choose to set it apart as the day on which we think about and worship God. 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verses 1 and 2 talks about how on the first day of the week, lay by something in store as you have prospered. What's he talking about? A general assembly of the Lord's church where they're meeting together and worshiping. Now, I dare say most of you in here understand the significance between the difference between a Sunday and a Saturday. But do you know that the statistics of the United States of America, as you start to watch people who call themselves Christians, but then you start to try to put their actions together with their words? Do you know that there are people, millions of them in the United States of America, who say, yes, I am a Christian. And then you ask them, on any given Sunday, do you worship God? The percentage of people who worship on a regular basis, if you had 2 million people saying that they were Christians, in general, on average, the percentage of people who actually put that into practice and worship God on a Sunday, set it apart as the Lord's Day, you're looking at less than 20%, if I understand it correctly. What, you've got 1.6 million of those 2 million people that would say, yes, I'm a Christian, and only 400,000 of them would say, yeah, I worship at all. You see what we're saying there? They're taking something separate and holy and just treating it like any other day. Let's look at something else that is often profaned. In fact, if you're listening to the word profaned, what is the most often profaned thing that you know? In fact, so much that it has gotten the word attached to it. Well, you don't want to go watch that movie because there's so much, what in it? Profanity. Why is bad language called profanity? You know, if you were to go to Ephesians and you were to look in Ephesians chapter 4 and you were to go in about verse 29, you would hear some very straightforward, easy to understand statements about how you use your words. Do you know that words are supposed to be set apart? They're supposed to be sanctified. They're supposed to be holy words. There's something different supposed to be about how you use your words. In Ephesians chapter 4, verse 29, let no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth, but what is good for necessary edification, that it may impart grace to the hearers. There's a very simple rule about how we are supposed to talk. The very simple rule about how we're supposed to talk is let's go back to Thumper in the movie Bambi. Bambi has just been born. He is supposed to be the prince of the forest, and all of the other forest creatures are going to see Bambi, and Bambi is there. He's, day old, not even a whole day, and all the forest creatures have gathered around him, and Thumper, the little rabbit, along with his rabbit family, is there, and Bambi's trying to get up, remember? And he has trouble getting up, and his feet are falling out from under him and sliding all over the place, and Thumper says, he's a little wobbly, isn't he? And then Thumper's sister elbows him, and she says, remember what Mom says. And Thumper straightens up, and his best, I'm going to regurgitate something that I have memorized voice says, if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. Do you know that's almost a very scriptural statement? Now, and let me tell you what I mean by almost. When you go to Ephesians chapter 4, verse 29, I would substitute the word good for the word nice. If you can't say something good, don't say anything at all, because according to Ephesians chapter 4, verse 29, let no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth, but what is good for necessary edification, that it may impart grace to the hearers. Is it the case that sometimes you have to say something that it might not sound the nicest, but it would be good? When Jesus said to the Pharisees, brood of vipers, who has warned you to flee? He called them a brood of snakes. Would most people have listened to that and said, oh, that's very nice? When a parent says to a child in a very stern parental sounding voice, I can't believe you did that. We don't do that because we are... Does that come out sounding really, really nice? Well, sometimes, no, it doesn't sound that nice, but can it be good? Yes, absolutely, positively. So the rule is, if you can't say something good, don't say anything at all. Your words are supposed to be holy. They're supposed to be sanctified. They're supposed to be set apart. They're supposed to be reserved for one thing. What are your words supposed to be reserved for? Your words are supposed to be reserved for building people up. Is that what you do with your words? Are you one of those people that uses the words that you have been given to build others up or to tear other people down? Now, I'm convinced that a bulk of your Christian life happens in conversation. Now listen to me, a bulk of your Christian life happens in conversation. There are lots of people that think it doesn't really matter what they say. It doesn't really matter how they talk to others. That's not really all that important to God. And that's just not the case. If you were to go to James chapter 1, you look in verse 26. If anybody thinks he's religious, the text says, but does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his own heart, this one's religion is, what's the text say right there? Useless. If anyone thinks he's religious, but doesn't bridle his own tongue, but deceives his own heart, this one's religion is useless. Let me tell you how I've seen this play out in real life. There was a guy that was a homeless guy down in Montgomery. He had several friends that he would hang out with. They would eat lunch right in front of our offices there in Montgomery. We had a stone just a little picnic table with some stone benches there, and they'd eat lunch. And so we started getting to know these guys. His name was Jason. Started sitting out there eating lunch with them, and I started getting to know them, was trying to make some inroads into converting them, talking to them about Jesus. He ended up going to the county jail. We were able to convert him, but this was early on in the course of the events. And so I was sitting there, and I was talking to him, and he and his 4 or 5 other friends, they were telling jokes. And one of the jokes that they were telling probably had the F word in it. I'm going to say 5 or 6 times. And I sat there and I listened, and they all thought it was really funny. And at the end of it, I said, well, hold on just a second. You guys know that you're going to have to give an account for all the things that you say. Every time you use profanity, every time you use bad words, you're going to have to give an account of that. And he says, oh, you talking about with God? And I said, yeah, you're going to have to give an account of all the things that you say, because by your words you'll be justified, by your words you'll be condemned according to Jesus. And he said, oh, hey, yeah, we use those bad language and bad words and stuff, but God knows we love Him. Interesting. Because God says in James chapter 1 verse 6, if you think you're religious, but you don't control your tongue and you deceive your own heart, then your religion is useless. You can't say in one sentence, you can't tell a joke that has 5 bad words in it in one sentence, and then the next sentence say, oh, God knows we love Him, and have any type of concept of the Christian life or spiritual reality. You just cannot understand what your language is supposed to be set apart to do. Your language is designed to be set apart to build others up. I was preaching down in Florida. I was probably about 20. I think I was a junior at Freed Hardeman, and was preaching down there for about 3 months this particular summer. It was a snowbird congregation where you would have about 150 people in the winter, but you had about 35 in the summer. And I was down there for the summer. I was preaching at this little congregation, and one of the families there, the mother, was basically kind of one of the backbones of the family. Of the congregation. Anytime you had a potluck, she was there with her. I think she had 4 kids or so. Her and her husband was there, and they were just one of the strongest families that were there. That's what we thought. And we had a 15-night gospel meeting that summer, and they were there almost every single one of the evenings. And I would spend time with her young people. Oh, she had a son who was probably 15, and then a daughter who was probably 12, etc. And so we would go over to their house, and I remember going over to the house one time, and I was talking to her, and just in the middle of the course of it, she just said 3 or 4 cuss words. And I looked at her, and I said something like, I thought you understood what was going on here as far as Christianity and controlling your tongue. She said, oh yeah, I just do that every now and then. Just do that every now and then. Oh, just every now and then I wear my shoes into a chicken coop. Just every now and then. Well, how many times does it take for you to wear your good shoes into a chicken coop and for them not to be usable to preach on Sunday mornings anymore? You see, when you take your language that is reserved, that is set apart, that is sanctified to be used for one purpose, you know what's to be used for? To be used for building up, and you use it for something else, you know what you're doing? Profaning something holy that God's given you. You say, well, I don't cuss. Oh, great. That's terrific. You shouldn't. But let me probe a little further into your conversation. Are you one of those kind of people that when you hear something good about another person that you don't really like, or that you feel like you're in competition with, you intentionally try to bring them down in the conversation? You one of those kind of people that when somebody else is telling a story and they're getting some positive attention for it, you kind of want that positive attention for yourself, and you try to make their story look less cool and less fun and yours look a whole lot better? There's a conversational personality called nah man. I actually just kind of made it up myself, nah man. And that is when you try to jump in a conversation and put another person down to try to make yourself look better. Somebody's telling a story about, oh, when they were 5 and they did something. You're like, no, man, let me tell you about this. And you're trying just to direct that to you and make that other person look smaller. You know what I've seen a lot of times in the course of my life? You've got an older brother, an older sister, that when their younger brother, younger sister is telling a story, they want to look like they know so much more than their younger brother, sister. They want to look like they're so much smarter, and they correct them out of a sense of, I want everybody to know I'm smarter than you and I'm better than you. And no, it wasn't 9:30, it was 9:45 when we went and did that. Do you use your conversation as a sanctified, holy, set-apart tool to build other people up? Or are you one of those kinds of people that constantly in conversation is looking for ways to put other people down so you will be viewed as the smarter, as the better, as the... Is that what you do? Have you taken a tool that God has given you for building others up, your language, and profaned it and pulled it out of what it was designed to be used for and made it dirty by trying to make yourself look like the better one all of the time, trying to correct people, trying to act like you know everything? I've seen people do that. They're profaning the use of their language. It's not just bad words. It's when you intentionally, with a motivation to make other people look smaller. Let's look at another idea. I want you to turn your Bibles to Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews chapter 11, you're going to get a sense of what faith is all about. Now, we're not going to discuss a whole lot about faith because we're just going to flip over to chapter 12 and see somebody that was called profane. A profane person. But in Hebrews chapter 11, we're going to see the attitude of people who God recognizes as faithful. I want you to look in verse 13 of Hebrews chapter 11, talking about Noah and Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and all of the heroes of faith. And you go right there in verse 13, these all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, and were assured of them, embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For those who say such things declare plainly that they seek a homeland. And surely if they had called to mind that country from which they had come out, they would have had an opportunity to return, but now they desire a better country, that is a heavenly country. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for He has prepared a city for them. Now, here's the characteristic of faith that God is focusing on right here in these few verses. People who can look beyond what's right in front of them to the reward and the treasure that is yet to come, that they have not yet seen, but they are assured of that. Now here's the opposite of that. When people don't look beyond what's right in front of them. When all they can see is what is immediately in front of their face. Now you go over to chapter 12 and you look right there in verse 16. Lest there be any fornicator or profane person like Esau, who for one morsel of food sold his birthright. Now, why was Esau called profane? Because he couldn't see past a bowl of soup. He had no concept whatever of the future. All he could see was this immediate life in the here and the now. What happens when that's all a person can see? Well, according to the text, the Bible says that that is a profane person. That's a person who has taken something that's holy, your life, and has thrown it down to a level of mire and dirt and ordinary. Let's see how that works. I was at the apartment complexes in Montgomery when I was first married. I'll never forget this. There was a young guy who out there, he was shooting some basketball on the ball goals out there, and went and started talking to him as he was shooting some ball, introduced myself, got his name, and as we started talking, I said something about, you know, do you ever think about your soul? And he said, what are you talking about? I said, your soul, there's a part of you that's going to live on after this life, and it matters what you do here in this world as to where your soul's going to go, either to heaven or to hell. He said, no, I don't ever think about that. I said, really? You don't think about that? He said, no, I just think about what's going on right now. I said, well, what if I were to say that I would give you $5, and if you would wait I think I said a night, just one day, 24 hours. That in 24 hours, if you would take that $5 and you would hang on to it for 24 hours, then the next day I would give you 100, what would you do with it? And here's what he said, I'll never forget it. He said, oh, I'd spend it. I said, you would spend it? All you got to do is hang on to it for 24 hours and you'll get $100, but you would spend it? He said, yeah, I'd spend it because, hey, money right now that you have is better than money in the future that you might not have. And he could not get past the idea of something right in front of him. What about you? How do you make your decisions? Is it based on what you'll get here and now, immediately? Or is it looking past this to something much, much more important? There was a study done on rats, pretty simple study. They put some rats in a room, and on either side of the room there's a little metal bar. On this side, the little metal bar, if you hit the little metal bar, a tiny piece of food dropped out every time you hit it. Tiny little piece of food dropped out every time the rats would hit it. On this side of the room, there was a metal bar identical to the one on the other side. And when you hit the bar once, nothing. You hit the bar twice, nothing. I think it was 4 times. You hit the bar 4 times, and a massive pile of food dropped out. You put rats in a room where you get one tiny little piece of food every time you hit a bar, or you get a humongous pile of food if you wait 4 times. Where do you think the rat goes every time? The rat's got no concept of the future. The rat's got no understanding of future reward. The rat wants what it wants right now. How many times have I seen a young person mess up their life, older person as well, because there was something right in front of them? There was a person they were flirting with at their workplace, and they had been married for 2, 3, 4 years, but this person just seemed like their soulmate, and they thought they had made a mistake in their marriage, and so they, after several months of getting closer and closer to this person at work, they decided that they would break their marriage vows and have an affair with this person because the right here and now was so important to them, and they couldn't see past that tiny, tiny piece of food right in front of them. You know, I've seen young people who have done things to get the approval of their peers, and peers that they would not talk to probably after high school or whatever for maybe the rest of their lives. But they have done things that they know is wrong to get that approval because the right here and now was so important to them. Well, you know what God calls a person who can't see into the future? That is a person who is a profane person, who for what's right in front of them doesn't see the glory of what's out there. Now let's sum this lesson up and turn back to Ezekiel chapter 22. God gives you a statement in Ezekiel chapter 22 after he's telling Ezekiel about how the Israelites have profaned him, have taken his holiness and made it dirty and normal and regular. I want you to look in verse 30. So I sought for a man among them who would make a wall and stand in the gap before me on behalf of the land, that I should not destroy it. I was looking for one person. I was looking for one person who would stand up and say, in this family, we're not working on the Sabbath. I was looking for one person who would stand up and say, we are not going to offer God blemished sacrifices because His sacrifice is holy. I was looking for one person that would stand up and say, as the leader of this particular community, we are not selling or buying on the Sabbath. I didn't find any. Do you know God's still looking for those people? For one person in your school that will not laugh at jokes that are profane, but will say in a very respectful and kind but bold voice, you know you shouldn't use God's name in that way. God's still looking for one person in your family who will stand up and say, we need to treat Sundays differently and make sure that we set aside a time to think about God and remember Jesus' sacrifice. God's still looking for one person in your community who will say, this life is not all there is. There's something better. Do you want me to study the Bible with you and show you what it is? If God was searching the halls of your school, the rooms of your home, the streets of your community, would He find you and say, right there, that young lady, that young man has set my name apart as holy, and they're standing in the gap. If He were looking where you live, would you be the one He would find? Let's make sure that we are setting God apart and making holy things holy and not profaning God. Really appreciate your time and attention.
Thank you very much, Brother Kyle. You got to see one of my greatest weaknesses at play a few minutes ago. I am terrible at names. The schedule has been changed just a little bit. There is a storm coming in here in the next hour or so. And so we're going to go ahead and go outside to the stairs in the grass, just right outside the store, and we'll go ahead and get our picture. And then after that, we will go to team time. If you will, if you're wearing an Elbridge shirt, please make sure to show it off. That's about all I got. All right, let's go.
Test. 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 Test.
I could hear you really clear that last time, but the thing is, it's really hard to tell with as much noise that's going on
Yeah.
here right now. So
Yeah. I guess I can adjust it during it. Test, test, test. Let me turn it like all the way up. Test.
yeah, that was loud.
Yeah. Test. 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 Test.